All right, so this video is to show an overview of a idea that I conceptualized or was inspired by, and then also following through on what it took to make and what I learned in the process and what I will plan on doing differently for the next iteration. This is mostly for posterity and also because others might be curious how I went about my process in the future, and I plan on iterating in a destructive fashion. Therefore, the version one documentation doesn't exist and won't ever exist. So this is what we get. So let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll get going. Yeah. All right. So I saw something similar to this. It might have even been the same one on Facebook. Somebody had posted it on a group. It was a V6 version, but somebody was like, "Oh, that'd be really cool in a V8 version." And of course, people make the 12 pack jokes because, really it should be 12. Sure, fine. I thought, man, this looks like a great idea for essentially a wobble pop cooler. Like, put your Coke in one side and rum down the middle. Like, awesome. And then you could even so I found something on Thingiverse that was similar. It still wasn't quite ideal in certain ways, and design aspects about it I didn't like. So I figured I'd try my hand at making my own from scratch. I'm certainly happy about certain aspects of the way it turned out. Other aspects can be improved upon, which is why there's version 2. And so let me go ahead and change to Fusion here, wherever Fusion went. There we go. And let's open it up and have a look. I'm also using the free version of Fusion. So that only allows you to have so many saved documents. So I tend to just pile documents on top of each other. So it is kind of a chaotic mess, but no bother. Wait, go away. I can't remember how to get rid of this panel. There. All right. So this was the end product. Some of the aspects here and design choices. I wanted a deeper valley pan for the design. Excuse my cats. Wop. I thought you were supposed to land on your feet. Um, some of the valley aspects here, right, is that I wanted actually there be a capacity for cold water, right? Because ice melts, turns into cold water, but it's still a lot colder than ambient temperature. It's wasted energy to just get rid of it. Um, And so the idea of having some, level of thermal mass in there is of value in my world. Plus, also it gives you more height for putting your bottles into the middle. Some other aspects. I went with full 90-degree because why not? It's cooler, right? Um, One of the designs I saw on Thingiverse was a narrower degree spacing, which would be easier for some aspects, which we'll get into in a little bit. But in other aspects, I don't know. Sure, pick your poison. If you're doing a V6 or V12, sure, it totally would make sense to do like a 60-degree separation because that would be more accurate. Um, but let's go ahead and hide some bodies. Have a look here. Also, I had a really cool idea of actually like cutting these as like recess and then filling in with a print. I realized that was likely going to cause challenges. We'll just say it that way. There's no way like the fitment was going to be perfect, and I was on a fairly tight time constraint because I wanted to actually give away my prototype to my inspiration for the Wobble Pop cooler in general, which is Derek from Bicycle Garage. So it's a huge shout out to him. He's a huge inspiration, and my phone is ringing with spam calls that I won't answer. All right. Anyway, so you can see here wobble pops, like that's I just used Fusion texts, which I can get into, but that's kind of irrelevant. I use plenty of tutorial and other stuff. But anyway, I want to talk about some of the design aspects of this and how it would have been done differently. So let's hide. Wait, okay. What is, oh, that's the other valve cover. All right. So some aspects here. I like the coolant port passages and the PCV passages. It makes it look, or lifter passages. It makes it look more realistic to me. Makes it look more identifiable instantly as an engine. Yes, that means that your ice water can only go up to that line. Otherwise, it'll spill out. No big deal, really. This isn't going to be a hugely thermally efficient cooler anyway. Um, so it's not really end of the world. Uh, this is all about style anyway, right? If you wanted an actual like if you want a cooler, go buy a cooler. This isn't because it's going to work great as a cooler. This is because it is cooler than your cooler. Um, so anyway, uh, printing, 3D printing. If you're not aware, you have to be very aware, very conscious about supports and what will need to be supported. Because if you printed from this axis, so to speak, if this were the bottom, and more spam, go away. This is when my phone sits on silent, but my wife's out of town, so I need to not be on silent. So if you printed from this face here, if this was the bottom where you started printing, then when you got up to somewhere like there, it's just gonna like fall apart. It's just gonna fall down because your printer is gonna print and there's nothing to hold up that piece of plastic as it prints out. So you just get this droopy mess and it just pile on the floor. So this seems like an obvious print surface. Um, an obvious first layer. Like that would be great to print off of. So the challenge there though is that, well, then what happens over here? Well, so we need to split this somehow. So we can print kind of from this side, but then also print from this side. And then where do they meet? You could, in theory, just put a line straight down the middle, which is what some other design, the design of Thingiverse did. That's I had reasons. I thought maybe that wouldn't work very well. And I figured if I'm going to have seams anyway, I may as well make this super easy on myself and make that a print surface as well. So then just kind of cut them, slice them where they all meet. And there's also, no, where did that other, I have it there. There we go. There's the centerpiece. Uh, so then that just kind of made it all work a little bit better because now I've kind of got this all separated into smaller prints that are easier to manage. And size really wasn't a problem for me. My printer technically could print this whole thing as one print. I have Elegoo Neptune 4 Max, which is, I think, if I recall correctly, 450 by 450 by 500 millimeter print space, which this would fit within. This is 300 millimeters, if I remember correctly, or 30 centimeters. So anyway, so there's a few challenges here. One, large square surfaces are always difficult to print. They really want to lift at the corners, especially depending on the mass above it, because as your upper layers start to cool and shrink, they pull on that bottom layer. And so, yeah, I had really, and also for whatever reason, my print settings were way off when I started this project. I had to recalibrate my flow and increase my flow by like almost 30%. And my first layers are still not turning out great. And I'm even manually overriding my first layers to be an extra like 20% over what I upped my base filament flow to. So yeah, for whatever reason, my flow is way off. And that was really obvious in this first print, which had really, really terrible surface texturing on the first layer. Also didn't adhere very well to the bed because of it. So it lifted even more and it was atrocious, but it's the bottom. You don't see it. I figured this is really kind of the core lessons here of what we're talking about and why I'm making this video. Don't spend your time reprinting every print because it's not perfect. This print was still perfectly acceptable for testing because this surface and that surface were as good as they were going to get. Those mating surfaces weren't warped from the lifting from the bed. They were square and true. So I figured I'm going to have to glue the thing together anyway. Just keep moving. So that's what I did. And I improved my surface finish by quite a bit by the time so after how bad that first piece turned out, I started messing with my flow. I got it better. And it was much better by the time I went and made my next cylinder head or next block section. These are technically cylinder head and valve cover, which we'll get to in a moment. So the next one turned out better, but still lifted off the bed a bit. I kept improving, adjusting my settings, and again, I kind of got to the end of it. I was like, well, it still technically works and it fits. I made these little indentations here. You see that little, it sticks up, and then I made a kind of corresponding indent on the block side, and it didn't work as well as I was hoping. Um, just the nature of the way it is. I could probably redo this and have them work better, especially if there's less interference and probably more of like a squared off shape versus a tapered shape. Um, it's just kind of the nature of printing. It's never going to be perfect, especially with the recess side. So what I ended up doing for one of these was literally just sanding it flat. Because I ended up with ridge marks because these are not like you're printing a diagonal. So you get line ridges. So I sanded the whole thing down flat, sanded the block side flat. And its fitment still wasn't great, but it at least sealed. And actually, all my sealing issues, locations were really in these corners, which come to realize that even that I didn't want a huge gap of like I didn't want like glue or epoxy oozing out the face of this as much as I can avoid. Some super glue, CA glue, leakage was certainly present, and I epoxied it really heavily from the inside here. Getting down into that corner was difficult, but getting into the corner, I realized wasn't actually my problem. The real problem is that I knew I wasn't going to be able to epoxy this inside edge very well. And so most of my gluing was from the outside here. So I think what was happening is that I've got water that ingresses on the inside of this edge and then runs down the seam and then comes out at this corner. But up here on this edge, I had no leakage whatsoever. And down the length of it, I didn't have any issues at all. It was only here at this corner because that's where you've got glue on the inside and glue on the outside and a cavity in between for that water to actually get in between at the joint. So yeah, so hindsight, 40/20 or whatever. Have all your glue either all on the outside or all on the inside. Probably don't try to do a mixture of the both. You got to be willing to do all of the inside if you're gonna and expect this to work perfectly. Which brings us to kind of the crux of what I'm going to do differently, which is that for the next version, I'm just going to slice it right down the middle. So Nathan, why didn't you do that to begin with? Why didn't you just slice it down the middle to begin with? Well, because even a 45-degree angle is hard to print. And in fact, I made kind of a mistake that I've already kind of rectified to some degree, which is, let's move that. Can also, you guys want to see me a little bit bigger, I can make this bigger, right? Yeah. There we go. So part of the challenge here, right? So this is my print surface. I'm printing from there. Anything more than a 45-degree angle is going to be difficult to print on most any printer. And even 45 can be difficult on some. 45 is kind of the accepted normal. You can get more than that if you, from what I gather from research on the internet, that people say if you do X, Y, Z and get your printer settings dialed in perfectly, in theory, you can go more than 45. But you only have so much material overlap, and it's really difficult to get it not to droop. And that's what I had. In my first version, which is slightly different than this, because I realized it and I immediately went back and fixed my drawing, even though I knew I wasn't going to print that drawing just yet. But essentially, I had huge distortions on this surface. It still technically worked, but it was just evidence of that drooping where layers were kind of folding on themselves as they were trying to dry. But also, like, this wasn't necessarily even a realistic aspect ratio for a valve cover anyway, and it still isn't quite perfect. It's good enough, kind of gives you that folded sheet metal style of looking at a valve cover, which I kind of like. It's also easy to draw, so to speak. But yeah, I probably should um bring this angle a little bit steeper or more aggressive and move that whole valve cover over down this way a little bit to make both of these angles a bit softer. And then they'd print better. The other issue I had is I made a dumb mistake. I added 2 millimeters in every direction before I shelled, and then didn't realize that that was going to cause me. I only need to add 2 millimeters in two directions. Once, once on the X, once on the Y, or however you want to think about your axes. But anyway, so I ended up with 2 millimeters worth of gap on my valve cover. So they didn't fit tight, which is fine-ish, especially if you're going to do something fancy like, cut a custom rubber gasket O-ring to put in there. But it's never going to seal perfectly anyway. And again, like thermal loss, like this is never going to be a perfect cooler anyway. You just kind of want it to look cool and to stay on. And they fell off when I just be walking carrying it and it would just kind of fall off. So yeah, definitely something I'm going to fix in version 2. And in version 2, I think I'm also, so when I cut down the middle, the struggle is going to be essentially when I'm printing off of this angle, how well does this face look and appear? Because that's going to be a solid 45-degree angle as well as this. So that's going to be right on the edge of what is realistically able to be printed. I could potentially put in some uh some kind of a support system, or I could like I could even maybe print some supports that are just kind of catch the midway points, so at least like if there is any, drooping, that at least gets minimized. I'm recording a video. What's that? Was that from Aaron?
Yeah.
Okay.
Give us extra.
Okay. I'm gonna give him another dozen tomorrow.
Okay.
So the challenge there is that I'm either probably have to print supports or change something in the design. Now, maybe I could do something like put like a little rib in here, or maybe even a couple of ribs, and then I could do the same thing down here. Could probably even do it artistically in such a way that it looks more like more like a real engine block with like casting and like you know what I'm trying to say. Anyway, I could make it look more realistic, and that might actually add some of the support that I need to make this print a little bit better. Well, we'll see. Depends on how much time I want to put into this before I print V2, which needs to be soonish because I have somebody who wants to actually. He's a friend. He just wants. I told him like I just pay me materials, but he wants a couple made. So I'm more than happy to help him, but I also don't want to take forever to do it. So I need to get moving on this. The other thing that it could, woulda, shoulda. So if we look at the inside of the valve cover, I probably could have made some supports between here and there, between the Coke, between the bottles, between the cans, basically. So 3 supports that go from here to there and here to there and here to there, so that this stays more rigid. Unfortunately, at the event that I was going to give this to Derek and family, there was big signs that said no bags, no coolers. And I was carrying this thing with, a handle of alleged drink and some sodas, specifically Moxies, because Moxies are a New England thing, and I was going to make sure that Derek knew what the heck Moxies were and that that's the proper way to have a wobble pop, in my opinion. So the issue is I left this in the car with the valve cover sitting off and just kind of resting on top of the engine. In a hot car, it's about 90 degrees out, maybe 87 to 90 degrees out. Car in the sun all day. This warped and got droopy. I had a feeling that was a concern anyway, because this is not like this basically prints solid. It's not even thick enough to have infill. I could make it thicker and have air gap in the middle and infill, which means it would, in theory, regulate a little bit better and keep its shape more consistently. But I can also just fix that with some support structures to kind of help it stay in shape. These long flat edges are just asking for heat warpage. So that's something I'm going to have to address on the next design. Yeah, that's most of what I wanted to cover. Let me think. The yeah, logo was fun to design. That's getting that to chamfer nicely is interesting. Uh, what did I learn about printing the letters? I think one of the things I learned is the side you're going to glue should probably be your bed side. I first tried to print this where like it was printed face down, where like the what you would see would be the first layer, which I thought would look better. The challenge there is just that your top layer surfaces, if they're not completely dialed in, are not going to be as flat as the bedside. So getting that to glue nicely is a little more difficult. Um, and on that note, also, gosh, these all of this was really hard to glue without the CA glue showing through wherever it would squish out. Part of that, I think, was that I was using like Gorilla Glue brand gel super glue. I think you're better off going with like traditional fast drying non-gel super glue and just being very as sparse with it as you can. So probably like the finest nozzle on you can get, because you really don't need a lot for these letters to stay on. You just need it in a lot of different spots. Very and then just need to have a good surface finish where, you know, what I would do is I would just take this and just rub it on some sandpaper on the counter for a few moments, just enough to just knock off the high edges, and it stuck really well. Um, so yeah, most of the CA glue was wanting to come out because your surface finish is good. That's what you want. You want a good surface finish, but then the gel is like way too much quantity. Um, the handle was just about right. I designed zero interference. That was a mistake. I had to sand this like heck to get it to come down in size enough to fit into its pocket that I made. Um, so that's something I'm going to address on the next one. I'm going to have to add a millimeter or at least half a millimeter on the, maybe even quarter mil on each side. Just a little bit of gap. So this actually goes in nicely. And I could have come out further on the design. Let me see if, let me, don't need that, don't need that, don't need that. And block. All right. So you can see there in this side profile. So this line right up there, that could have brought this way out and it would have been a lot more sturdy. I was worried about trying to get it in and how much these arms needed to flex in order to go in and click into place. And it was a little bit creaky picking it up. So the handle could be a little bit beefier. I might just keep this out. I feel like this looks like a cooler handle, and that's part of what I liked about this. Now this isn't an area where I'm wasting a lot of material anyway, so making it a little bit beefier doesn't cost me much, so to speak, in materials. It doesn't cost me much in print time. And this prints really consistently because you've got a nice print face there, so you just set one of these sides as your bed surface and prints really pretty good. On most printers, it should be fine. So I might increase or decrease the rate, make this come down more, and maybe even do some like handle scalloping here. Maybe, I don't know. The other thing I could do would be to do something fancy that make it more difficult to print, which would be to like make like a twist in here where it kind of comes out at an angle, then turns, then goes like a zigzag, which would allow you to kind of hold it at like a 45-degree angle. Um, I don't think it'll be a problem as long as the valve covers stay on. Holding it on the side was fine. With the valve covers off, cylinder head valve cover, the red parts, if those were off, then it carried no problem, even full of ice and everything else. The struggle is with the valve covers not wanting to stay on very well. As soon as it bump your leg, now it comes off. So if you carried it the other way around, um, it would be less likely to be able to knock those off, and you can kind of keep it closer to your body. I don't know how I might redesign the handle to accommodate maybe both carrying directions. I don't know. But I'm not too worried because the handle did work and worked well. I actually was surprised that I didn't have any issues with it really flexing too much under all the weight. I kind of expected that. I kind of redesigned it 3 times, making it wider and bigger and bigger. And I was like, this looks really cheap and chintzy, and it still kind of looks like not enough, but actually it was all right. I could probably even make it a little bit longer if I'm generating more overlap hang for that the ridge there for it to click into place, which would also allow it to kind of hang a little bit lower next to you, which might make it more convenient to carry. I don't know. But I was also surprised that I had no issue, even with the handle on, getting a bottle of 750 milliliter liquid of your choice. Bottles fit in there just fine, pretty nicely actually. As long as it wasn't a round bottle, I think it'd be fine. Any type of a oval or square bottle or rectangular bottle would fit in without issue. And even like a smaller round bottle would probably be fine too. Like if it's a bottle of wine, even probably would fit in there. So yeah, so the one downside if I make this shorter is I get less volume inside, and also makes it less space for a drink to be put in from the top. But that might be a sacrifice I have to play with for fitments. But yeah. Anyway, that's version 1. I'll probably post version 1 files, STLs on Thingiverse for other people to print. I would not recommend printing it. This is more of an exercise in design process and learning from my mistakes, but also learning that it's not that big of a deal to fail. It's better to fail than to never even try. So get out there, make something, be productive, do something cool. And eventually I'm going to figure out how to stop recording. There it is. All right. Have a nice day, y'all.